Shalom Aleichem, a good night of Shabbos to everyone. It's Shabbos Parshas Shalach, Shabbos Shida. We just celebrated Tu B'Shvat. So it's a great time to talk a little bit about Chabad and Breslov. I'm working on an upcoming book on these two very important Hasidic movements. So I wanted to start a series of discussions, stories, history about the relationship and philosophy and ethos and just practical observations of these two movements. But let me begin with a story. A story that happened in 1802 and in 1810. So Reb Nachman was living at the time in Zlatopol, Ukraine, which is not far from Shpole, Ukraine. That's where the Shpole Zaida made his base in a permanent way, and it became known as the Shpole Zaida. Rabbi Yehuda Leib, not Rabbi Aryeh Leib. The family, the tradition is Yehuda Leib, named after, I believe, the Maral of Prague. Anyway, so in 1802, he didn't agree with Reb Nachman's style of teaching Chassidus, of Avodas Hashem, which consisted primarily of dancing, saying words, and not necessarily understanding what you're learning. It was more, of a heartfelt type of an approach. The Avodah of Breslov, as it's known today, and for the last 200 plus years. There's a lot of discussion in the academic writings about what exactly happened, and I'm not going to go into that right now. Some is true, some is not true, some is unknown, and I don't want to get into that and become an opinion sayer on a matter that's really unknown. But clearly, everyone says that the Shpole Zaida really bothered Reb Nachman. Although bothering doesn't mean, persecution, bothering doesn't mean, go and hurt him, but he definitely didn't approve of his style, and therefore, since Shpole Zaida was the Rebbe in charge of that region, including Shpole and Zlatopol, and Reb Nachman was in Zlatopol, in 1802, Reb Nachman just didn't want to fight with him, and he left for Breslov. That's when he went for Breslov. He was born in Mezhebush, being a great-grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, the holy Baal Shem Tov. And on his way there, he passed Uman, the famous Uman, that 50,000 people go to on Rosh Hashanah. And he told his people that after his lifetime, he would like to be buried there, because he passed the old cemetery there, the Jewish cemetery, and there were 30,000 Jews buried there, being murdered in Nebuch in 1768. There was a terrible pogrom, and 30,000 Yidden were killed. And Reb Nachman had an affinity for them. They were by Kedoshim, Balei Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice, and he said he wants to be buried there. Okay. And he moves to Breslov. He's there till 1810. And in 1810, a few weeks or so before a great fire breaks out in Breslov and destroys lots of the city, burns lots of the city, he sent a shliach already to Uman to find a place to live because his health was deteriorating, and he felt it's just a matter of time, and therefore it's time to move to Uman to get ready for the next world. When he comes to Uman now and he settles there, he befriends various maskilim, people who were in the Enlightenment movement, which there were quite a few in Oman. I mean, it wasn't just Oman, it was in many cities, and he had a good time with them. Of course, his purpose was to elevate them and bring them back to Yiddishkeit, to Torah. One of them was Reb Moshe ben Reb Shpole Zaida, who was a grandson of the Noide B'Yehuda, Reb Yecheskel Landau. That's how things were in those days. And the word got out that Reb Nachman is becoming influenced by the Maskilim, which wasn't true, but that's the way it seemed. Shpole Zaida heard of this, and he wasn't far away in Shpole at the time, I believe, and he again exacerbated the attack on Reb Nachman, saying, you see that his derech, his approach, leads to dealing with maskilim and becoming a maskil. Now, again, I'm not sure if the Shpole Zaida actually said that, or intimated it, or his people said it. But it's interesting that in the late 1800s, Rabbi Chaim Meir Hellman, the one who wrote the Sefer Beis Rebbe, which is a recording of history of the first three Lubavitcher Rebbes, the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, and the Tzemach Tzedek. And our Rebbe says about the Beis Rebbe that we see from various places that he was a big daikin, that he was particular and careful in how he wrote things and what he wrote, and he weeded out, Baumeises, things like that. So it was printed, I think, in 1912, but he gathered information already in the in the late 1800s, 1880, 1890. And he writes there in the name of one of the grandsons of the Tzemach Tzedek, and I believe that's the Kapester, Reb Shlomo Zalman, the Baal Mogen HaOvis. I believe he's referring to him. We know that he was close to the Kapester dynasty and Rebbes, and to the Ladir, both who were grandchildren of the Tzemach Tzedek. It was only later that he came to the previous Rebbe in the 1920s, and that's a whole other story. I wrote about all this in my book Chabad Portraits, volume number 2, if you care to follow up on the details. But anyway, to make a long story short, he asked, the grandson, Rabbi Hellman asked, what do they say about Reb Nachman and Breslev? So he says that he allowed himself to get into nisyonis, tests, trials, tribulations. And he doesn't say what they are. And then he says it's not the way it should be, because we say every morning, Al Tevideinu Lidei Nisayim, we shouldn't be brought, Hashem should not bring to us tests. And he says, nevertheless, he was a great man and a great warrior, implying that he overcame the tests. But the fact is that he says he put himself into a situation of tests, and that wasn't something that was acceptable. It seems to me that the tests are referring to his engagement in Uman with the Maskilim. We know that the Maskilim had very many times bothered from Jews and laughed at from Jews. And here we have a situation where Reb Nachman of Breslev, such a great tzaddik, is initiating a relationship with the Maskilim in a way that's positive. And this was unheard of, and very muzar, very strange, and very concerning. And therefore, the Shpole Zaida, from 1810, all those years till the late 1800s, the word on the street was that Reb Nachman, engaged in nisyonis, and that's not a thing to do. The fact is that many of those grandchildren and great-grandchildren come to Uman today, or great-great-grandchildren, okay? So the fact is that Reb Nachman was not a maskil, and it was just a way in to be makar of them. But I believe, and this is what I want to conclude with, how careful one has to be with who he engages with who he surrounds himself with. Even if he is pure and he is on the right page, and his purpose is to transform them and to elevate them, unless you have a hayra, instruction from a tzaddik, from a rav, from a rebbe, that's what you should do, you shouldn't do it on your own. I recall there were very few people in Chabad that were experts in Lahavdil, the New Testament. But they say that Reb Emanuel Shochat was, and also a Yid who just passed away, Lil Nishmasei, Reb Shlomo Sawalski of Michigan, of Detroit, Michigan, who came to me in California during the 80s. And he was there for Shabbos, and I had a chance to speak to him at length. And he told me that he got permission while he was learning in Morristown to become an expert in the New Testament so he can schlep people out of cults. And he worked with Shia Hecht and other people to save Jewish kids who were never caught in Jews for Yoshka and the like. But he needed special permission. You need special permission. This is not for everyone. And I think that this is something that today, Breslov, Baruch Hashem, just as Chabad's thriving, Breslov is thriving. There's over 5 shuls, Breslover shuls in Monroe, in Kiryas Yoel, and there's Satmar, basically, who are the attendees, and they identify with the teachings of Reb Nachman and Reb Nosson. And it's a very great movement now, 200 years later. It's not just surviving, it's thriving. Nevertheless, the story tells us how careful one has to be when engaging in a dangerous situation. And the connection to Shabbos Shira and Parshas B'Shalach and our period we're in is that singing a song, one of the great avodas of Breslov is dancing and singing. They dance every time after Shachris, the morning service, and after the evening service. Dancing, it's great to dance. It's great to be freilach. It's a requisite in avodas Hashem. But at the same time, we have to know that we have to follow our teachers, and we have to follow our Messiah. And yes, you could say Reb Nachman was his own trendsetter. The fact is that he suffered so much, and the suffering continues, as we will continue in this series on Breslov and Chabad. I will tell you more stories and more historical facts that point to a suffering for no reason, in a way. Just because someone was chayshid, someone had a concern and suspect that something terrible was done, right? And that's my point. Nothing terrible was done. On the contrary, but it looked bad. So when things look bad, you have to consider not going in that direction at all. May Hashem help that we should sing and dance with the koyach of Torah and the koyach of Ahavas Yisrael, and use the positive message that Breslov gives to the world of simcha and hope. They should help. We should have Mashiach, Bekorev Mamish. Good Shabbos, good Shabbos, good Shabbos.